You can believe what you want to believe, but if you're an atheist, you're basing your goodness and morality on what?
Where's your judgment? How can you have judgment if you have no faith? And how can I trust you with power if you don't pray?
The atheists are, in fact, immoral.
There is nothing immoral if there's nothing in charge, because everything becomes moral.
Considering that atheism cannot possibly have any sense of absolute morality, would it not then be an irrational leap of faith, which atheists themselves so harshly condemn, for an atheist to decide between right and wrong?
I'm not horrified by any thought of dying, because I believe that you go on to a celestial place, which is wonderful. But for you, atheists,
where's your evidence of the celestial place?
Welcome to Ask an Atheist, FFRF's new Facebook Live video, where we will answer common questions and sometimes common insults, as you just heard from that string of unflattering comments, about non-believers and other freethinkers. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. Annie Laurie and I are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this new weekly show.
I'm Andrew Seidel, a constitutional attorney with FFRF, and the topic of today's show is that perennial and insulting question that we non-believers hear all the time: how can you be moral if you don't believe in God?
As we debunk the old myth that you can't be moral without God, we invite you to post comments or questions right here on Facebook. Or you can send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Or if you want to talk live to us, you can Skype us at live:/ffrf.studio, and we'd love to talk with you in person. So when you call in, hang on. If you want to hold for a while, we'll get to you as soon as we can. We welcome questions from non-believers as well as believers. So if you have any religious friends or relatives, invite them to join our show.
Of all the bugaboos about atheists, agnostics, and skeptics, the number one myth is that atheists are all immoral. It's the automatic assumption that atheists must be sinners and bad people, and this is one of the most common and insidious attacks on non-believers. It's the reason why many non-believers are even afraid to come out of the closet to their families or communities.
Well, it's because the Bible says we are evil. One of the most quoted passages in Scripture says, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. They are all gone aside. They are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one." That's Psalm 14. And that Old Testament verse is echoed in the New Testament, which says, "They have become worthless. There is no one who shows kindness. There is not even one. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of vipers is under their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness." That's from the book of Romans.
With such venom being spewed from the pulpit, it's no wonder that a longitudinal study by the University of Minnesota has shown that atheists are at the bottom of the social totem pole when it comes to acceptance. We're the people you'd least like your family member to marry, for example. Religious stereotypes exist that prisons are filled with atheists, when in fact we're disproportionately not represented in prisons.
And don't forget the study that found that people believe atheists are about as trustworthy as rapists, or the Gallup polls that year after year show that nearly half the country would refuse to consider an atheist for president or vice president. The misconception that atheists cannot be moral is based on at least three false assumptions. First, that religion is the only source of morality. In other words, that there's no basis for morality without God. Second, and this is really a corollary of the first, is the assumption that if you're religious, you are automatically moral. A bit of a circular reasoning there. And third, that people want to become atheists just because they want to go out and sin. So let's dissect these three false assumptions one at a time. First, let's take a look at the faulty assumption that religion is the only source of morality. Now, we define morality usually, commonly, as a code of ethical behavior. Many religionists believe we humans are incapable of forming our own moral rules, that we can only be good if some authoritarian in the sky dictates to us how we need to behave.
Born-again Christians, it turns out, really don't trust themselves. And I'm speaking as a former evangelical myself who was taught to trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not on thine own understanding.
And that is one of my least favorite Bible verses, by the way.
That's in Proverbs 3. And we were also taught as Christians to bring into captivity every thought unto the obedience of Christ in 2 Corinthians. Most believers want or need this external code of behavior, a cosmic code of commandments. It's engraved on stone tablets. It's comforting to those who can't or won't think for themselves, or who have been indoctrinated to believe that they are miserable sinners who should not think for themselves. As I say in my book, Godless, theists are afraid people will think for themselves. Atheists are afraid they won't.
Pretty good line.
Great line.
Religion deals in absolutes. Humanistic morality, which most atheists subscribe to, on the other hand, is not based on rules, it's based on principles. That which contributes to well-being is good. That which threatens it is bad. For us non-believers, as I write in here's another book, in my book, Life-Driven Purpose, morality is simply the intention to act in ways that minimize harm. Whatever harm is, it's natural. It's not supernatural. Although we did evolve with a certain degree of moral instinct and human kindness, there are often gray areas because many moral judgments involve a conflict of values, which is why usually we have to temper our moral instincts with reason.
My mother, Ann Gaylor, who was the principal founder of FFRF, liked to advise us and people to use what she called the yardsticks of reason and kindness. And here she is on Oprah Winfrey's AM Chicago show in 1984.
Without a God, without a supernatural belief, without a deity, without anything that you say you don't need and you don't have, how do you judge your own lives? And let's forget about the Catholic Church.
Well, she wants that answer. So
I'm sure people may have different answers, but my answer is I apply the test of reason and kindness. I use the yardstick of reason and kindness. If I'm contemplating an action, is it reasonable, is it kind? And that's all you need.
And that is indeed all we need. We need to use both reason and kindness. And isn't reason a better basis for ethics than faith? The assumption implicit in the question, can atheists be moral, is that the word religion is synonymous with morality, and by that standard, atheists are immoral simply for being unbelievers, not because of any actions we may have taken. I like to tell believers that it's not what you believe that counts, but what you do. We should base conduct on intent and consequences to the welfare of individuals, humankind, and the planet as a whole. And surely that is more ethical than basing it on childish fear of divine retribution.
Or some childish conception of the afterlife. What's more noble? A believer who only tries to behave because he wants to get into heaven? Or someone who leads an exemplary life, who tries to do good, to leave the world a better place because it's the right thing to do? Let's ask this another way. Do you want your children to be good because you've promised them dessert? Or do you want them to be good for goodness sake? We'll come back to this assumption that religion is the only source of morality in a little bit.
So now let's turn to this assumption that if you're religious, you're automatically moral. The Boy Scouts of America, for example, very ignorantly assert that you can only grow into the best kind of citizen if you believe in a God. But I would argue if you want people to grow into the best kind of citizen, you should not teach them religion. You should teach them to think for themselves and to take responsibility for their own actions. And right away, Christianity is contaminated by the often self-fulfilling prophecy that humans are miserable sinners. If you tell someone that over and over and over again from childhood, of course, many of them will become sinners.
And our prisons are full of religious criminals, and our planet is besieged by holy wars and terrorism in the name of religion. And religion often leads followers astray. People who are taught never to question authority are more easily victimized or duped. And the Bible itself is a moral quagmire. Murderers, mutilators, child molesters, rapists, sexists, racists, and even slaveholders have turned to Bible texts to justify their abhorrent behavior.
I have had the dubious pleasure of rereading the Bible, again after all those years of ministry, rereading it in depth, in researching my latest book. It's called God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. That book is based on Richard Dawkins' famous sentence from the God Delusion, which points out that the biblical deity is a jealous, unjust, unforgiving, bloodthirsty, genocidal ethnic cleanser. He's a misogynistic, racist, infanticidal, pestilential, malevolent bully, and more. You can see these biblical passages online at the website which FFRF just made. It's called unpleasantgod.ffrf.org.
And I think there's a mistake on the monitor. It's just there's no period between
There's no period.
unpleasant God. So
just unpleasantgod.ffrf.org.
Now, as a staff attorney here at FFRF, I've had the real pleasure of writing legal letters complaining to public officials who have made many of these ignorant assertions. The idea that all you need is prayer to remedy the world, and that we need more religion to end crime. A few weeks ago, I sent a letter to the San Antonio mayor who made this mistake and didn't get reelected. I've written to police chiefs and governors and sheriffs, most recently the governor of Kentucky, who think that religion will cure crime. But social science shows that for any measure of societal health and well-being, from teen pregnancy and STD transmission to violent crime, the least religious countries in the world do better. And that trend holds here in the States as well. The least religious states score better. Now, this doesn't mean that secularism cures those ills either, but we're talking correlations here. But what I find particularly telling is that studies of heroic altruism during the Holocaust found that the more secular a person was, the more likely they were to rescue and help persecuted Jews.
And Andrew, you're quoting a lot of research by, among others, Phil Zuckerman's book.
Absolutely.
He wrote a book called Societies Without God. He's a sociologist.
And I'd like to add where religion really goes wrong and becomes so dangerous and such a negative is in valuing dogma and obedience over people. As the Nobel laureate Steven Weinberg put it, for good people to do bad things, that takes religion.
And finally, the very irrational argument that we have heard so much, that I've heard from a lot of people who I thought were my friends when I went public with my atheism after years as an evangelist, is that the reason you don't believe in God is because you don't want any moral restraints on your life. You just want to go out and sin. Well, that was really insulting. I always like to point out that we pass laws in our country, secular laws, to keep people who want to do these horrible things, to keep them away from the rest of us. That is not why I left religion. As I put it in my first book, here's another book, Losing Faith in Faith. I threw out the bathwater and I found that there's no baby there. I obey the laws, I pay my taxes, I help with blood drives, I contribute to charity, I try to be a good husband, a good father, and now a good grandfather. I left religion not for moral reasons, but because it simply isn't true. I didn't want to waste the rest of my life promoting something for which there's no evidence. I didn't want to live in a fool's paradise. This life is all there is. Like Robert Ingersoll said, one world at a time. It's fine if someone wants to believe in religion, so long as they don't try to force it on me through law or by social policy.
And Andrew, I thought it would be fun to end the segment by playing a video that you recorded for us for our Out of the Closet campaign. speaks to why you became an atheist.
Yeah, let's do it. My name is Andrew Seidel. I'm an attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist because faith is not a virtue. A willingness to believe anything without evidence and to cling to that belief is humanity's greatest liability. I'm an atheist because religion perverts love, requiring us to love an imaginary tyrant more than our family, more than our children. I'm an atheist because our universe is far more amazing than the paltry miracles of the Bible. I'm an atheist for the same reason that you are an atheist about Allah and Osiris and Thor. I'm an atheist because vicarious redemption through human sacrifice cannot save my soul. Another person's death will not erase my wrongs. And I am an atheist because I take personal responsibility for my mistakes.
And I believe we already have a few questions.
We do. We already have some questions that have come in. The first question we have is from Mary J. Rowe, which is, why do so many people believe that morality is tied to religion? It's baffling that people don't realize we each have a moral compass and know when something is right or wrong.
Yeah, well, we do have a moral compass, and part of that is instinct, because we evolved as animals we're social animals. We have to get along with each other, and so I know that if something's hurting me, it's also hurting you. So I have an empathy. Most people who have empathy and altruism can see that harm is universal. So almost all cultures have come up with something like the golden rule. Don't do to others what you would not have do to them, or do to others what you would like them to do unto you.
Which is a little more dangerous. The golden rule in the New Testament isn't as well phrased as some of the earlier versions.
Yeah, because Jesus...
Do not do unto me what you would not like done to you.
Yeah, because Confucius said it in the negative way, which is a lot better. Don't do to others what you would not have. Because if you do it in the positive way, what if you have bad taste, you know? What if
you're a masochist?
Yeah, what if I would like something done unto me, so I'm going to do that unto you. I would like to be preached at, so, you know, I mean,
it can create some problems.
But a compass, a moral compass is an interesting word, because a compass doesn't tell you where to go. All the compass does is tells you where north is. And so if you think of north as a world that has less violence and less harm in it, that's your compass. However you get to that world, you have to figure out. You have to use reason. But we want a world that has less violence and more understanding. That's our compass, and let's figure out how we can get there.
And I think one of the ways that religion has helped tie itself to morality is by making the in-group versus the out-group. You know, you don't want to be like the people who are not like us. You know, you need to be moral, you need to be part of us. I think the church has kind of actively pushed that idea for centuries. You know, they've tried to show, exploited the idea that, you know, if you're not with us, you're kind of against us.
Well, that's what Jesus says.
Well, as you pointed out, Andrew, in an earlier show, love thy neighbor in the Bible meant love thy Hebrew neighbor. It meant love your own kind.
Your tribe.
And big deal, every group does that. I mean, whatever group you're a part of, we all love our group. But what about the outsiders? What about those Canaanites? What about those non-Israelites? What about the non-Christians? What happens? Where's the love for those people? So it really is insular.
Absolutely.
So we have another comment or question?
Yeah, we have a second question. Do you want to read this one?
Yeah. Let's see. Sean Farrell, can an American Christian live by actual Christian values?
Not legally.
Not legally is what you say, yes, and I agree. I hope not. But Dan, as the born-again Christian of what's your reaction?
Well, there's so many teachings in the Bible that it's a good thing we don't follow. How many actual Christians are remarried to someone who's been married before? Jesus said very clearly, the Bible says very clearly, whoever marries a divorced woman is committing adultery. So why are they ignoring their own Bible? If they would have followed their own teachings, Jesus even said, there are some men who castrated themselves for the kingdom of heaven. Mm-hmm. It says eunuchs. Eunuch is a castrated male. Mm-hmm. He that's able to receive it, let him receive it. How many Christians are going to go, oh boy, I'm going to live by that Christian value? You never hear a sermon.
Or even some of his Sermon on the Mount suggestions, like be like the lily of the valley. You don't have to plan ahead for...
Yeah, take no thought for the morrow.
Take no thought for the morrow. Let the dead bury the dead. Well, if someone's dead. I mean,
Well, I'll tell you
Literally.
one Christian principle that I wish they would adhere to, and that's the one in Matthew 6, verse 5 and 6, which says, if you're going to pray, go into your closet and pray in private, not in public. Because one of the things we deal with every week here is government officials constantly praying. We just submitted a brief in our Chino Valley case against the school board there that's imposing prayer on all the students in that school district.
It said, don't be like the hypocrites. You go pray quietly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's amazing that they ignore that one so much. Let's see them adhere to that principle.
Well, then Jesus, Jesus' principles and Jesus' moral compass of his day was really nothing more than what his Old Testament father talked about, this, violence.
Not one jot or tittle of the old law will fail.
And not only did Jesus fail to tell us there's something wrong with slavery, which you would have thought it's the New Testament.
It's kind of an important rule.
This would be kind of a good time to point out, by the way, you don't need the Civil War, just stop having slavery. Yeah. Jesus even said in Luke that he showed us how compassionate he really was by saying, there are some slaves that you should not beat as hard as other slaves because they didn't know better. And I think that shows a little bit of moral compassion, but what about slavery itself? He had this huge beam in his eye that he couldn't even see. Of course not, because he was a product of the first century Jews who wrote that book.
Yeah, he had no divine morality. His morality reflected the morality of the times.
Yeah.
He was just a man, if he existed. So.
And I think maybe the other question would be, if you're Christian, maybe we should be asking the question that's asked of us. How can you be moral if you're Christian?
Well, I think that's the Steven Weinberg quote that you mentioned earlier that I love so much, because it's not, Dostoevsky has that famous quote that if you don't believe in God, everything's possible. But really, it's the other way around. It's if you believe in God, everything is possible, so long as God tells you.
If you think God's telling you something,
exactly.
Then look what you can do in His name.
You'll sacrifice your children as Abraham tried to do, or as Andrea Yates did. So I think it is the other way around, and it makes it harder to be moral if you believe God's talking to you.
And I do want to say, of course, that most religionists are better than their religion.
Of course.
Most of them are not combing the scriptures to fulfill exactly what they say, although in history that's happened. And so I would never put a Christian on the same spot that we've been put on. But yet this question should be asked. If they believe in an immoral religion, then what does that say about them?
Turnabout's fair play.
So we have another question?
We have several questions. So Daryl Braun asks, can televangelists lead a moral life?
So right along the same lines. So it doesn't seem like it, does
Well, I'm
it?
wondering if he's maybe more focusing in on the idea, the prosperity gospel kind of notion, the idea that these are televangelists in multi-million-dollar houses. They're piggybacking on their very poor congregations, and maybe he's thinking about Jesus.
Well, and Jimmy Swaggart, the fall of Jimmy Baker. There's been quite a few.
And I'm wondering if he's thinking of Jesus's teachings about being poor and giving away your wealth or something like that. I wonder if that's where Daryl's going with.
And Sinclair Lewis's book. The televangelists,
Elmer Gantry?
the Elmer Gantrys of the world.
So I used to do a show with Steve Benson, the editorial cartoonist, where we called it Tunes and Tunes, his cartoons and my tunes. And we showed some of these televangelists on the screen, the Jimmy Swaggart in tears and all that. And one of the lines in our show was, do televangelists do more than lay people?
That's pretty good.
Well, because look at the hypocrisy of it. They're preaching to these people how to live, but their own lives are in tatters.
Well,
the more you puff yourself up, that's pretty good camouflage.
It's true. The thing that bothers me about it is it's so predatory, and it really is preying on this vulnerable population, and they make it seem like the poorer you are, that's a bigger sacrifice for your faith to give us money. Even if you can't pay for food this week, I've heard them say, go ahead and donate to us instead. God'll look more kindly on you for doing it that way.
And that's not let Billy Graham off the hook and his son. And don't you have a story about your grandmother?
When my grandfather died, I went to Grandma's house in Oklahoma, and I was looking through their records, and I saw that for many, many decades, they sent the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association $15 a month.
Which was
regularly,
quite a bit of money way back.
Especially back in the 60s and 70s. And they were not wealthy people. They were maybe lower middle class people. And they sent, thinking they were doing this great thing. And then I later learned that the Billy Graham Association, even at that time, had like a $15 million surplus. And the Billy Graham Association didn't actually pay for those rallies. They asked the local organizers to pay for, the churches all had to raise the money to pay for that. And Billy Graham got to waltz in and do his thing. So my grandma was sending money that she could have used to this organization that didn't need it.
Wow.
We have another question?
We do, and this is from Stephen Sywek. Sorry if I butchered that name. How can you be moral if you do believe in God? Seriously, how many theists have ever read their horribly immoral holy books? More importantly, why do we atheists allow theists to even frame the question this way? And I think we were just kind of talking about this.
Yeah.
But,
well, and it's not that we want to blame ourselves, but this is the most common stereotype that we do encounter, and I think it is the most insidious myth or a claim or accusation against non-believers. I've never really done a talk show or radio show on the subject of religion without being asked this question, and it even comes up in our state church work because, of course you want to use a Bible in the schools or a Bible in a public ceremony because the Bible is good, and when we come back and say no, it's not, then we're being accused of being immoral for wanting to take religion out of government. So it's a constant issue. Yeah. But I agree with you.
Stephen.
Yes, Stephen.
Yeah, and I think Stephen's point is right on. How many of them have actually read their books? This is a question that I actually really wonder about.
Well, and then there have been studies. And in fact, atheists and non-believers are much better read about the Bible than believers.
Absolutely.
And there are some recent studies.
Well, you know what it's like? It's like if you're installing a new app on your device or you're logging onto the wireless and you come to the terms, this long list of terms and you have to accept. Do you read those things or do you just scroll all the way down to the bottom? I accept. And I think most Christians are like that with their Bible. They think there's a couple of good things in there, yeah. And there are, actually. So there are some good teachings in the Bible, but on balance, the ugliness overshadows the goodness.
So it's terms and conditions Christianity. That's what.
Yeah, they just hit accept. I don't know what's in it, but it's a good book, so I'm going to go with it.
We have this is an interesting question. Jim McConnell asks, can you speak about the rate of atheists in prison versus Christians? And how can Christians convince themselves that they're moral when they're the ones filling up the prisons? So I meant to look up this statistic actually before we started, but I think it's 0.02%.
The last time we saw it, yes.
In federal, there was a study out of federal prisons.
Well, the federal prisons. Now, there's a growing population of non-believers in the United States, so perhaps we'll see a few more in prison, and we do hear once in a while from non-believers with state church problems in prisons. But in terms of we are disproportionately not represented in prisons.
Vastly. I mean, there's 6% of the population is atheist or agnostic. Close to 7%.
And almost 24% non-religious.
And almost 24% non-religious.
Total.
But 0.02% atheists in prison versus close to 7% that's incredibly disproportionate.
And of course there's other issues because often ministries are given access to prisoners that the rest of us aren't given. It happens all the time.
I think that's an important caveat, that you do get some privileges for being religious in prison.
But you're getting encouraged to find religion. It's a good phony way to say that you are regretting your crimes without actually doing anything about it.
And so in a prison survey, atheism might be underrepresented just because they think the wardens are going to give you more favors on good behavior for being religious.
But we have every reason to believe that actually criminals are not usually atheists, even though there's these ridiculous stereotypes that they're all atheists. And it is really a major problem that we face in terms of public relations.
So the statistic doesn't prove that being an atheist makes you a better person. It just puts the ball back in the court of the believers who claim that being a believer makes you a better person. How do you explain the fact that believers are overrepresented in the prison population?
Well, and also when you look at, for example, the Catholic religion, where you can do whatever and then you can confess your sins at the end and get into heaven. And for example, Adolf Hitler was Roman Catholic and to his dying day was Roman Catholic. Are we to presume that perhaps Hitler in the religious mindset is in heaven.
But you don't know. Maybe at the very last minute he confessed to Jesus.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
You don't know. Were you there?
So according to Catholicism, he could, no matter what you do, you can make it into heaven if you confess your sins and find Jesus at the end. Well, that's not a very good way to promote good conduct.
Seems a little unjust. We have another question from Allie, who asks, what about moral gray areas, like stealing if your children are hungry? How do you determine what's right or wrong?
Well, and we talked about that when we dissed the Ten Commandments on our first show, that the Ten Commandments are couched in absolutes, and what if your life depended on it, your child's life depended on it? So religion is full of absolutes, and there are no nuances or gray areas, right?
Yeah, in religion, it's all yes or no. You know, Jesus said you should be cold or hot, or I'll spit you out of my mouth, right? If you're not,
which is not a very pleasant.
No, it isn't.
Picture.
and as this questioner points out, most of our life is lived in a kind of a gray area, and the whole idea of a moral compass is sometimes when you're trying to go north, you can't go north. Sometimes you have to go east or west. Sometimes you have to go south a little bit, depending on the terrain. And as we navigate our moral lives, sometimes the terrain is difficult. It's not hard to decide, should I burn a baby with a cigarette? No, that's an easy question, right? No, it's obviously. But sometimes the toughest moral dilemmas involve a conflict of good values. I have this value, and how do I weigh them? And so the moral compass would say, well, try to get a result that has the least amount of overall harm. If that's what you're trying to do, even if you fail, you're using a moral compass to try to get through life. Sometimes something's got to give on both of them. It's like if you have two candidates to vote for in an election and you hate both of them. Should I vote for Stinky or should I vote for Bully? Which one? Well, you might think you have a moral obligation to vote for the one that causes the least amount of harm. So therefore, you're going to hold your nose and vote for Stinky, right? Even though you don't think it's good. So there's all these gray areas where you don't really have a clear answer, and that's where moral judgment comes in. With religion, you don't have the moral judgment. You just look it up in a list of rules, and you just do whatever God tells you.
And I don't know that God had an opinion on Stinky versus Bully.
Well, I think he wanted Bully because Bully's the Christian, right?
So John Michael Strubhart asks Andrew, are there any U.S. judicial decisions that use the Bible as a legal argument? And there are a few. Probably one of the most prominent was Bowers versus Hardwick, which was the decision where the Supreme Court upheld the Texas laws criminalizing sodomy. And they did it because the rules against sodomy have been preserved for so long in the Judeo-Christian legal tradition.
And which has since been overturned.
And yes, that was overturned in 2003 in Lawrence versus Texas. And there was absolutely no reason that the Supreme Court should have been citing religious rules as part of interpreting a secular constitutional challenge.
No constitutional reason anyway.
Exactly.
So I didn't realize that.
And there are a few older decisions as well where it comes up where it's less specifically a biblical reference, where it's more generally this is the divine order type thing. That phrase actually appears in the Bradwell case, which was when the Supreme Court
didn't let women
join the bar, become lawyers. Yes.
So of course, women keep silent.
Yes. Yes.
Well, speaking of books, we showed a lot of my books today, but Annie Laurie has a book, Woe to the Women, the Bible Tells Me So. And in your book, by the way, that's the first book I read. I read your book back in '84.
First free thought book, you mean?
Yeah, I read your book back then. The first book I read ever, yeah. And you point out that many of our modern laws, especially back in the 19th century, dealing with women and women's in inheritance and women in education, came out of the principles that were in the Bible, which held women back for so long.
Well, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who is the mother of the modern women's movement and the first to call for women's right to vote, recited in the history of women's suffrage, the Bible was hurled at us from every side when they called for the vote. And everything they called for, it was always the religious press and the ministers in the pulpit. No, women cannot wear pants, the Turkish pants. No, women cannot go to college. They can't own property. They can't have custody of their own children. They can't have professions. They can't have control of their own
because the Bible says
money,
women should keep silent.
And that they were in subjection to men. So yes, it's worked its way into law, but most of it we're working out again.
Did she say the Bible's the greatest stumbling block?
In the way of women's emancipation.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. It's typically when you see the Bible or religious laws referenced in our secular law, we're trying to escape it. Right. I mean, another decision that it came up in was when the court was dealing with, in the Loving case, in the previous decision, the court was dealing with a decision where the court had said that God created the races and put them on their different continents.
So the Loving case is, what, 67?
I think so.
Miscegenation, saying that you could not have
struck down bans on interracial marriages. Yes, and even the very first punishment for interracial relationships on this continent was in 1630 in Jamestown, I believe, and it was portrayed by the court as a crime against God. These two loving people
Native
getting
American
together. I don't recall the exact facts, but yeah. So when the Bible works its way into law, it's always a bad call.
It does not belong in our laws, and fortunately, most of those decisions have been overturned. And by the way, if you haven't seen Loving, the feature film about the Loving case that came out last summer, it is wonderful.
I have not yet. I have to do that. So Darren Balmeister asks, thank you for your work. A lot of people turn to Christianity because they're looking for community. Where are the places that you find community? Well, here at the office, we have a pretty great community.
Yeah, we're spoiled. I mean, there are a lot of regional groups. There's the Sunday Assembly. There's just been a plethora of local and regional free thought groups. Myself, I grew up without religion. I'm a third-generation freethinker. And so I like that adage be put on a bus once, celebrate reason, sleep in on Sundays. But I recognize that people who are in far-flung places, in conservative areas, really feel alone. We have over 20 chapters of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and there's so many atheist meetup groups. But I do think that is an area where we need a little more infrastructure.
And I'll say that I think one of the benefits of the online community now is you can, if you are in one of those far-flung rural areas, there's a really vibrant atheist community online that you can take part of and join. That's very, very welcoming, and I would highly recommend anybody.
And the idea of community is not necessarily correlated with how can you be good without God, because sometimes community can make people worse. You can look at the Klan, look at these religious groups that people gather together, look at the white supremacists in that. But
I was going to say, my dad, who's died, grew up in Springfield, Missouri, and he...
Missouri?
That's how he said it. He was a native, and they went to the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and he was disgusted because they were segregationists, and the deacons, they'd all be patting themselves on the back about what good people they were on Sunday, and then on the whole rest of the week, incredible racism when he grew up in the 30s and early 40s in Springfield, Missouri, probably still to this day. And that was one of the reasons that it opened his eyes to leave religion. So he did not find community in his particular church, but there are a lot of Unitarian Universalist congregations which is creedless, and they vary in flavor. But there are ways to get together on Sunday if you have one of those in your area.
But even then, what is community? A century ago, or even more recently, in small town America, or small towns anywhere, the church was sort of the local place where people would come together and meet and socialize. We would just watch that movie Pollyanna, right?
Oh.
And Haley Mills is there, and a lot of the action in that movie, it's a pretty fun movie, A lot of it happens in the church, and the minister, to his credit, does something good through all of that. But now with the internet and many more options for people to get together, some area of common expertise, you can find community in a chess club or in a swimming group or whatever. You can find community in all sorts of ways. It doesn't have to be through religion itself.
And I don't know if it really has to be at a weekly meeting. But
if you really
people have
need a
different
weekly
needs.
meeting, they can just join us here every Wednesday on Facebook Live.
There you
go. There's
but it's something we're working on.
We have a couple more questions. Yes, we have Lauren Fajerski Judson, sorry Lauren. As a parent, I worry about what my child's experience will be with two atheist parents. Any studies, research, or information to indicate what that experience might be?
Well, there's just a study about empathy that atheist families.
Yeah, that's right. Atheist children are
more empathetic.
On average, more empathetic and more charitable and concerned about other people as human beings.
Was that the one where they were less likely to steal as well?
That wasn't part of that study.
Okay.
But,
we'll have to look it up. It just came out.
But you were raised in a non-religious family, right? So did you turn out as a moral monster?
No, I mean, I think, what is the name of that person again?
Lauren.
Lauren, I think you should be very proud that you're not going to be inflicting dogma on your children. And in fact, my parents were so adamant that they thought it was almost child abuse to indoctrinate small children in these abstractions they can't possibly understand, especially original sin. And you have two adorable toddlers. You know, can you look at your babies and think original sin?
I can imagine how any parent can do that.
And we have some other adorable babies in the office. It's ditto. Original mischief, maybe, which is great. It's part of their development. But I think it's something to be proud of. And I think that I don't think most atheists want to indoctrinate their children in atheism per se. We want our children to grow up to think for themselves.
So that's the goal.
And if when they are old enough to make up their own mind and they've been exposed to your views and other views and they decide to go the religious route, well, I'm sure you'll love them too, even if you're disappointed. And, you know, I think that most atheists and agnostics have intense respect for freedom of conscience.
Absolutely.
And for the rights of children. So
and
I
we
think
have
it's
a daughter.
Yes.
We have a daughter raised in an openly atheistic family who knows how to think for herself. And it wasn't like we were indoctrinating her every Sunday. You have to memorize Bertrand Russell and you need to answer. We just let her be herself. And your mom used to have a saying that parents really do not raise their children. Children raise themselves, right? And parents are facilitators. Parents provide a home and an environment and love and food and all that. But really, do any of us think that our parents made us who we are? They influenced us.
She particularly did not like that term, raised.
Raised a child.
And I mean, respecting your children, giving them a rich environment, encouraging them to think, letting them know there's other views, but not being afraid to share your views. We don't want atheist parents to seem like they're apologetic or too timid to, you know, that there's something wrong with that view. And I think what an advantage it was for me not to be raised with religion. Look what you had to go through, Dan, to kind of undo all of this indoctrination.
You can see the scars are still...
But I meant a lot of waste in terms of your education and what else you could have done with your life instead of soul winning. And, you know, I was really free. It was not having a debt or a monkey on my back that I didn't have to fight. And you had some religious upbringing.
No? My mom encouraged me to go out and go to temple with my Jewish friends, go to the different churches with my Christian friends, and it became very obvious very early on that these mutually exclusive claims, they were all wrong and none of them were right. So, no real...
But I had the opposite feeling because we used to go to Sunday school every week, and I would sometimes invite my friends to Sunday school because my teachers and my parents said, go invite your friends.
True.
I'd go over to there, I had my little coat and tie on, I go over there and they're playing in the backyard having fun. You want to come to church? No. And so it's kind of like, the thing was, we thought we were special. There was sort of an insularity that we churchgoers were the truly good people. And look at all these bad people, they're not even going to church. So there's this sort of differential that's added. Maybe that's part of that study, of why people raised without religion don't have that us versus them mentality.
Well, just one other thing, I don't want to hold up the other questions, but my mother wrote a little piece up about my older brother. We had boarders, and I think it was an African boarder, took a liking to Andy, my older brother, and said, could I take him to my church? And my mother said yes. And when he came back with Andy, he had kind of a sheepish smile on his face, and she asked him, well, how'd it go? And he said, well, he said he'd rather play outside.
Fair enough. I think Lauren has hit on kind of a rich topic here, so we'll probably do a future Ask an Atheist just about parenting, I would imagine.
About parenting, yeah.
So we have a question from Bar Nyazov. Again, sorry for the pronunciations. As an atheist, how should an individual deal with religious imposition that's occurring within a family? So I have a couple rules that I try to keep in mind when I'm dealing with religious family members. And the first thing I try to always keep in mind is remember that this is a good person. They're not a bad person. They just believe in a bad idea. I think that's important. And the second thing that's important for me when dealing with a religious family member is to remember that they're not stupid. Just because they have a religious belief, they're not stupid. They believe a bad idea. Most
of them.
Even if I know they are, when I'm engaging, I tell myself that they're not. I think it's a good idea to just keep in your mind.
Well, respect.
Yeah, and I mean that's what
you don't have
what
to
leads
respect what they think, but you respect them and their relationship with you.
And I think the best thing you can do, really, when you're engaging, is ask questions that you care about the answer to. That is the way that I do it to sow doubt. And I do it because I think religion needs to go away, and I do enjoy sowing doubt in people. But
this person's talking about imposition, because my first reaction would be, hey, if you know you can't get along on this topic, you just talk about the things you can get along on, which may also, in this Trump era, in politics, can also be true. That old adage about don't talk about religion and politics at a party. So like if you can get away from it, there's nothing to be gained. But if they're imposing it on you, I guess we'd like to know what that is. Maybe prayer.
Sure.
Maybe that you have to come in late.
Thanksgiving dinner or something like that.
Come in late, or let someone know ahead of time. Gee, that really bothers me. That might be why I come in a little late.
Or I just don't participate when that happens. I'm happy to hold hands, but I don't put my head down or anything like that.
If you don't have to create a ruckus, that would be the best thing. Do you have any advice? Because you have some religious relatives.
Well, my brother Tom is a great guy. He's a born-again Christian, and he, after I became an atheist, my mom and dad became atheists, my brother Daryl became an atheist humanist. We kind of jokingly called Tom the white sheep of the family because he stayed a Christian. And so we kind of have this rule. We like each other. We're brothers, right? And we don't get together that often, but let's just talk about the things that unite us. Let's talk about the things that we agree on, and why, there's so precious little time you have with your family. Why spend it fighting about things? Why not just remember the good memories? And I think sometimes atheists might go a little bit too far in trying too hard to get everybody else to think like us, when, like in your example, they know your views, right? You're not hiding anything, but then just leave it at that and just be an example, be a good person. And
I think that is important. And I think there's a lot, because there are so many misconceptions about it. I mean, this whole program is about a misconception everybody has about atheists. I think it's important to just be a good person, be a good model, and always be open. I've gotten quite a few questions from family members about very, very obvious things. The one that sticks in my mind is, but if you're an atheist, that means you believe in nothing?
Yes,
that's like,
that is a classic.
And yes, and
that
this is misconceptions that people have about atheists, that they don't mean you any harm. And so no, you say, of course not. There's many things I believe in: love, family, friendship. I just don't believe in God. That's it. And I think you can do you can do a lot for your family relationship by being just open and honest about that. And it won't work for everybody.
Right. I'm thinking about this person, especially if they're a minor and they're under the constraints of their parents, or they need their support, or to go to college, they don't want to make waves. There can be some very dismaying situations.
Yes, there can. And we've dealt with them. We've helped these kids who have been in this situation.
So sometimes you just are going to have to put up with it, depending on what it is.
Safety first, unfortunately.
But if your family sees that you are a person of integrity, that you have some moral values, that you're kind, like your mom said, kind and reasonable, if they see that without religion, you're just a basically good person, then that goes a long way.
Is there anything else?
We have a last question from Chris Gregory. Can you elaborate on the recent Supreme Court Trinity Church decision, and if there's any way to legally fight that decision, and also any consequences that will stem from that decision? So we're still reeling from the decision. This is a terrible 7-2 opinion that came down on Monday. We were kind of expecting it after listening to the oral argument.
But not a 7-2. I still held out. maybe I thought it would be a 5-4.
After listening to the oral argument, I thought it was unfortunately clear, which it usually isn't from oral argument. It is a bad decision. It is a wrong decision. One thing that's very interesting about it is they didn't touch on the Establishment Clause at all. The parties agreed that there was no Establishment Clause problem, and the court accepted that agreement. So the bulk of the analysis that the court needed to do in this case is just completely missing. So that's one good thing that we can hold on to about this.
And there's
this
a
case.
footnote by Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote it.
Footnote number 3.
And you want to explain that?
It says that the opinion is limited to playground resurfacing only.
But Supreme Court decisions never are just limited to one thing, and what's already happened.
And yeah, the next day, yesterday, the court actually put a couple other cases back down to the lower courts to reinterpret in light of Trinity Lutheran.
And one of them was the Colorado voucher case.
There was 3 Colorado voucher cases.
This is a very chilling development.
It is.
I mean, we're all kind of licking our wounds right now. We did put out a statement at ffrf.org on the news section, and then you're working on
I'm working on
analysis.
a blog that'll go out probably later today.
Yeah. So there'll be more, and of course we'll be covering this all along.
And we will be looking for ways to turn this opinion on its head and use it to our advantage.
For somebody who doesn't know what this is about the High Court saying that a Missouri state statute that had stronger prohibitions against funding of religion than basically the First Amendment just doesn't matter anymore.
Pretty much.
And about 30, there's some, I see different things.
38, I think.
38 or 39 states, including the state of Wisconsin where we're based, that have these Jeffersonian provisions that nobody shall be compelled to attend, erect, or support a place of worship. And this particular language was about funding. So it's a very, very bad decision.
And we should take this opportunity to correct. The common misconception about the case is that it is about playgrounds and kids with skinned knees. And that is absolutely not what it is about. This church runs what they call their learning center, which is meant as a children's ministry. If you look on their website, it's under the ministry tab. It's called their children's ministry. It's meant to solidify the faith of kids as young as 2 and to bring other kids in the community into that faith. And now what the Supreme Court has said is that the government has to fund that ministry. It's a very chilling opinion.
They can discriminate and they can proselytize. And as Liz Cavell, your wife, another staff attorney, pointed out, they had pea gravel. It's not like the kids were going to fall and hurt themselves, that they were just trying to get money that the state had offered, which was not available to churches.
Yes.
And they demanded that they get that perk, a public perk, even though they discriminate. And yet the case was framed as discrimination against churches.
Yep, and that's the very chilling aspect of it.
It's discriminating against the discriminators, basically. But I think one of the dangers of a case like this is that even though, as you point out, the decision was limited, the religious right will take an inch and make it into a mile. They'll say, oh, good, the court's going to give all this preference to religion.
Absolutely.
Like what happened with the Greece decision and school board prayer. A lot of school boards said, oh, well, they can pray in legislature, so we can pray too. That's why we're in court in California.
With winning.
And why you're in court in Congress. Part of the Greece decision was everybody gets a chance to give an invocation, and the House of Representatives says, except for Dan Barker, because he's an atheist.
Yeah, we're waiting for a ruling on that.
So that ties this question to the topic today. How can we non-believers be good without God? And the chaplain of the Senate denied me to be a guest chaplain because I don't believe in a higher power. So apparently having a higher power makes you a good person. Not having that higher power excludes you from the conversation.
Excludes you as a citizen.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think we've roundly covered this topic, and it was nice to get that question about Trinity Lutheran.
Yeah, I could talk about that for too long,
and
unfortunately.
there'll be more about that.
Yes, keep an eye on our website.
If you want to delve a little more into this topic, there's so many great books. You've seen some of them. And among the books that FFRF sells, which touch on these, you've seen Losing Faith in Faith, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, written by Dan. We also have a non-tract on 10 common myths about atheists to dispel those myths.
So thank you for joining us today, and let us know by Facebook or Reddit or Skype if you've got any other questions or questions that you would like us to address on Ask an Atheist in the future. And thank you for joining us.
Tune in next week.